brief explanation of, like Amy mentioned, what Ditto Kids is, um, and why I started it, because it hasn't been that long, to be honest. So first of all, I'm local to the area. We're in like the Silver Spring, Rockville area, and we've been here for 7 or 8 years, and this is such a great community. Um, I have 3 children, almost four. I'm due in the summer with my fourth. And I started conceptualizing Ditto Kids years ago when my oldest was about 3 years old. We had, an experience with a new little friend of ours who was going through some challenges. Um, and my daughter who was exposed to some racist ideas, which is what happens in the world and with young children. It happens very young. And she was barely 3, and she just really started parroting things. And for me, as a Black mother to a biracial child, I was so concerned, of course. I had always done everything in my power to, teach a solid diversity and inclusion education. But I felt like I hadn't put as much effort and time into giving her a specifically anti-racist education. I felt like I needed structure and guidance. And so I, began looking around for something and couldn't find anything. So I started taking classes and workshops myself and doing research. And eventually I began writing a curriculum. And, after talking with a few people, I realized that, hey, maybe other people could benefit from this, because if I can't find what I need to stay on top of this as a busy parent, who I feel like I have pretty decent like knowledge about this kind of thing. I mean, I just feel like it would be a big challenge for other people to do the same. So I started creating this magazine, and I think that we have a pretty unique approach to anti-racism. And the focus for me has been really getting in there and working with children when they're young, because as we know, it's like Dr. Beverly Tatum says, like racism is the smog around us, and it's in the air we breathe, and children absorb these things even when they don't say anything. They're noticing, what's happening in society. So the magazine is a curriculum, a scaffolded curriculum within magazine format to make it easier for parents and caregivers at home to use with their kids. There's lots of other anti-racism resources out there, but so often they're manuals that are geared towards teachers. And that's just too much for people to get through, myself included as a busy parent, So what I wanted to talk with everyone about today was really the first 2 steps of what I believe is a complete anti-racist education for a young child. And these first 2 steps are something that I feel like they're really left out, but they're so crucial, and there's something that we have to do over and over again as we try to guide our children on this journey and set them up. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. You can all see my many tabs. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Wait. Give me a second. Give me a second. Okay. All right, I'll just do it this way. And so while we're talking, I 100% want this to be a discussion. If somebody, there'll be a few points where I ask you to think about things and reflect on things a little bit. If anybody ever wants to say something, I would love to hear. So just chime in. Um, and I'm not quite sure. Oh, wait, here we go. There we go. Can you all see this? It's in like presentation format. Okay. I tried to click on it before, but it wasn't letting me. Okay. So what we're really talking about today and what I'm really passionate about with young childhood anti-racist education is timing. I believe that timing and the when is so, so important. And when we mix up the order of things for the young child, we risk a lot of issues for children of color self-esteem in particular. And it's kind of the exact opposite of what we want to be doing, but very often that is what ends up happening. So this is kind of how, I view things. Sorry, I think I can make this. Okay, great. Um, we're all in this together. We're working for a world where every child is protected and honored exactly as they are. And this quote is from a great resource, Anti-Bias Education for Young Children and Ourselves. I love this book. It's incredible. And that's our focus with Ditto Kids Magazine and with our anti-racism work. We're trying to honor the individual child exactly as they are. And what does that mean for parents of multiple children or for classroom teachers? It means that we do have to be really cognizant of, if you're a classroom teacher working with parents to find out exactly where that child is in their learning and what that child needs. And it may be different for the kids in your home as well. Okay, so just some basics. I think a lot of us have heard this at this point, but some things that we can cover. Age 0 to 6 matters so incredibly much with anti-racism education. We know that children begin noticing racial differences as babies. Researchers estimate about 6 months of age. And kids watch very, very closely and they look to society for how to group people and things. Preschoolers around 3 and 4, they really start trying to make sense of this world. They really want to group things. They want to group people. They want to try to simplify how complicated everything is. And so they look to the grown-ups in their lives. They watch what we say and what we do and how we're living. Children, they can begin showing racial bias between the age of 2 and 4, and by kindergarten, many kids have the same attitudes about race as the adults in their lives, which makes total sense for a child. And so this is the framework through which Ditto Kids is structured. First step, and the way we introduce it, is self-love and self-respect. I'm very big on this. I think it is so crucial that children have the opportunity to learn and to vocalize love for themselves, every child, regardless of race or background. The second, love and respect for others. So once they've really had the opportunity and the practice kind of loving themselves and they're feeling confident in that way, they can really start to love and respect others. And then the next is the ability to recognize inequality. That takes a lot of practice, even for adults, right? And then the tools to address it in ourselves. That's something that also takes a lot of practice. And we'll talk a little bit more about these things later, but one of the things that I'm pretty big on is the importance of teaching humility to children. Like kids are just so wonderful. So often they are so humble and they're so ready to learn. And sometimes every once in a while, there are certain things that they just put that foot down and they don't want to say that they're wrong because it feels a little scary for them. And so it takes a lot of practice to be able to recognize some big things like maybe I'm wrong about this. The tools to address it around us. And so that's getting into, later on when they can have practice, when they can start trying to make some changes in our community, and then continuing to educate ourselves, because this is something that is a lifelong journey for all of us, right? We all have so much to learn, and our kids are just starting. So, today I'm really going to be talking about these first two, self love and self respect, and love and respect for others. I firmly believe that these 2 points are very much left out of the conversation today. Education in the home for our children, anti-racist education in the home for our children, and also in schools. I feel like we've done an excellent job in a lot of communities on trying to get to sharing with children the inequities that exist, that we forget to share some really important things with them, and it does become a self-esteem issue for a lot of kids of color. So let's move on. Okay, so just a couple questions. So think about a family story, however small, that has been told to you or passed down, and it can be something that you perceive as being positive or negative. How does this story make you think about yourself, and how does it make us view others? So here's an example. I was trying to think of a story. I couldn't think of very many ones, but I was raised in Baltimore. My family's from Baltimore. And my mom told me a couple times that my grandfather, he was a longshoreman by day and he was a boxer by night. And that's pretty much all she told me. But it was a very simple statement, and it made me feel strong as a kid. It was interesting because it was something, that simple story about my family was something that gave me a lot of strength. Like, oh wow, I'm strong too because that's my granddad. um, and so, think of a story for yourself, and what did it make you think about yourself? And so right now, very rightly so, people point out that too many parents delay teaching their white children about the realities of racism. And this is 100% true. Um, but we can't jump straight into teaching Black and brown and white children about only the hard stuff without filling their minds with decolonized perceptions of Black and brown cultures and contributions and history, and also the present. We're kind of doing it backwards. And when this happens, it negatively impacts kids' perceptions of themselves or a whole group of people. So I'm going to tell a little story about a friend, with her permission. It's a local friend, and I've known her, and since she had her oldest, who is 7 now. She'll be 8 in the fall. Her oldest is an awesome kid. They are awesome people. For context, they're a white family. And over the years, she'd asked me, a few times what she could be doing. And I kind of shared some ideas with her on how she could begin to give her children an anti-racist education. And one thing I mentioned to her was that I noticed that almost all of their books that they had in their home were focused on segregation, civil rights, Jim Crow, things like that. Only the tough issues, only the points of pain. And they didn't have any other, own voices books that portrayed Black and brown families just living and being people. And so, she contacted me about a year ago and said, oh, hey, I just need a little advice. My daughter, she recently we were writing some holiday cards, and she was writing one to a Black family. And she said in the card, she said, happy holidays. I just want you to know that you're what did she say? I just want you to know that you're important, even though all the terrible things that have happened in the Black community, or something like that. So, which, it's such she is such a sweet child. I just love this child so much, by the way. She's so sweet. But her mother said, and as we saw with the card, she was having a hard time viewing people of color as anything other than struggle and pain. And that's not what we want for our kids. We don't want that for our white kids. We don't want children of color to be thinking that about themselves. But when we skip, you know, filling them up with the beautiful decolonized histories and stories of Black and Brown cultures and people, that tends to be what happens. All right, so there's three main levels through which racism operates. First is institutional or systemic racism, right? That's, you know, systems, redlining, things like that. I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with this kind of stuff here. The other is personally mediated, and so that's when there's assumptions about somebody's abilities or motive or intelligence based on race. And the third is internalized, and that's conscious or subconscious acceptance of racism. And this is what we're really focusing on today. We're building a child's world and self view, which is just, it's such an awesome responsibility to be a parent. And by awesome, I mean huge, and sometimes feels like very weighty. But that's exactly what we're doing when we're teaching them. We're building their world and their self view. And when we skip over these crucial two first steps, children from a young age begin to internalize racism and biases. And it makes it very challenging to move kids to the next several steps of their anti-racism education. I think you would just have to, you would get to the next stage and they would struggle and you'd have to back it on up. And so, you know, what stories are we telling our children? Do they know as much about, you know, the power and wealth of African empires as they do about Jim Crow? So I just sent issue 2 of Ditto Kids to the printer, and I'm so excited about this one because the first issue we set up a lot of, you know, like defining things for kids, getting them a lot of information. And the second issue, we still had a lot of definitions and things, but it was really all about showing and telling that story, these untold stories. And so we talk a lot about Timbuktu and Mali. It's just very exciting. Do they know as much about the intergenerational strength of Mexican families as they do about injustice for asylum seekers? Do they know as much about the creative artistic force of Japanese Americans as they do about World War II internment? Sorry about the typo there. When we skip these stories, there is an impact on children's physical and mental health. As we know from so many studies, racism affects childhood health. It affects physical health. It also affects mental health. And I would posit that it's not just those outside experiences. It's not just the systemic racism that's affecting children's physical and mental health. It's also the, you know, the internalized racism. When you don't hear any, you know, when you're only hearing about pain and suffering and how this relates to you in X, Y, and Z, it's chronic stress. And I think it leads to health issues. So, you know, there are hard things in the world that we have to teach our kids. Would we teach our kids about war before we showed them peace? Would we teach them about like abusive relationships before we show them what a healthy one looks like? We set the stage for children, right? Especially young children. It's the base of the pyramid. So when we move on to helping see and recognize inequality, they don't believe that injustice and struggle is the defining feature of their own or someone else's culture, ethnicity, or race, because it's not. Okay. So how do we continually teach these steps to our children and ourselves? And once again, that's just the 2 steps that we're focusing on today. So I have just 11 thoughts that I wanted to share with you all, 11 steps that you can try out in your home with your children as you try to guide them through these first two steps of anti-racist education. So, and feel free, if anybody has any questions, jump in, but no pressure. So step one, we need to change how we teach and perceive culture. First, when we're sharing culture, we need to share both history and present culture of Black and Brown people. For the young child, history and timelines are not very clear. What's yesterday? What's tomorrow? What is 1850? So there's work to be done to make sure that kids aren't absorbing historical representations of cultures as current representation. And I feel like that's something that happens a lot in schools, or when we're trying to teach just culture in general. With kids are so tactile. We give them fabric and we give them dance and music, and they get a little confused about what's what. So there's a lot that we can and should learn from each other, but learning about culture just for the sake of learning is not the primary goal. We're teaching young children about the cultures in our world, about our world culture and our world heritage, so that we can help them connect the dots between values and between there being strength and value in a lot of different ways of living. And so it's important that as our children's first teachers, we avoid the trap of teaching only about surface culture instead of deep culture. These cultures and our world stories and ways of living, we want them to be real, and we want to teach deep culture, and that will give kids a chance to also reflect on their own culture. I think that when we only teach, say, like, this is the dance of this culture and this is the music that was around way back when, that doesn't feel as salient to a lot of kids. But it is salient how kids are educated, or how families group, or maybe religion or spirituality, how children are born. Those things are things that are big questions that loom in kids' minds about their own cultures anyway. And so in a society where the dominant culture isn't really considered to be a culture at all, it's just normal, right? Such a problem. It's important for kids to have this opportunity to identify and examine their own culture. So when we get into deep culture, it brings that opportunity to the forefront for them. And so I'm just showing you throughout these 11 steps, I'm just going to be showing you a few pages from Ditto Kids just to give you a sense of how we did it and what that looked like. So this is just a little spread. We were learning about the Wixaritari, or the Huichol, in issue 1, in part of issue 1. So we learned about them a little bit. And then we had an activity where we said, okay, now kids, based on what we learned, and this is something that a child would do with their parent, when you think of them, what do you think? Let's color the ones that we think count for them. Do we think they're brave? Do we think they're strong? Are they family oriented? Are they giving? Just trying to give them the opportunity, or the community center, just trying to give them the opportunity to think more deeply about, okay, I learned about this culture, but what does that mean? And then we had, I didn't include this, but there was another spread where we learned more about culture, and then we did an activity, as you see here, where we gave them the opportunity to learn a little bit more about observable culture and unobservable culture. Which one's which? What can we see? What can't we see, but is still equally important, right? And as they did this activity, they were also invited to think about what each of these was for their own culture. Okay, so number 2 is Own Voices, Books, and Stories. So obviously it's like the rallying cry of I feel like, at least my world right now, representation matters, and it does so much. Sharing books and stories that show Black and Brown characters doing things that everybody does, right? Like I mentioned in the story with my friend's sweet daughter, they were only showing books that showed pain and struggle. And there are so many great books out there. I'm just thinking of one, like I said, Jumping in a Pile of Leaves. What was that called? I don't remember. It was a great book. My kids loved it this fall. Kids going to the beach, kids just being joyful, hashtag Black joy and all that stuff. Picking out a first day of school outfit, things that pretty much most kids experience and most kids get excited about, losing a first tooth, things like that. So I don't know about you, but for me, some of the most formative books were the ones that were on my family's bookshelf that we bought. And not everybody has access to buying books. And books are very expensive. But if you're in that situation, buying diverse books and not only getting them from the library, I think is something that's very formative for kids, because you're sending this valuable message to your child about your family values and your family culture and what is important and who is included in this world, which that should be everybody, right? Okay, so number 3 is don't be a tourist, be a citizen. So it's really easy, I think, to be an other culture popper inner. It's, technical term. I couldn't think of anything like a better way to put it, so I put it like that. But it's easy to say, oh, like the Smithsonian, like Namaya's doing this great thing, like this event, let's go to it in non-COVID times or whatever. And to go and to learn and experience and then go home and, the people that you're inviting in your home, the people that your family is meeting up with for dinner, they have, a culture very similar to you. It's not a diverse group of people, but kids are watching and they're learning from our examples. And so, when we're trying to teach them about who is a part of their world, right, and your family's world, we really need to be expanding our circle, right? Okay, so number 5 is make the connection for the kids. Be open about similarities and embrace them, and also be equally open about differences. Differences and similarities are something to celebrate. I think that I think a lot of times it's very normal for people and kids to be a little afraid to acknowledge differences, or some kids are a little more shy or a little more nervous with those who have differences from them, and that's okay. They should not be made to feel ashamed of that at all. The world is big. They've been on it for 4 years. They're just trying to learn, right? And these children and all families can benefit from practicing, vocalizing about our differences and our similarities and spending time in diverse environments. So I'm just showing a spread with, one way that we did this in Ditto Kids. I love this one. We called it story hopscotch. It's basically Mad Libs. But, it's like a little story about 2 friends, and it goes through, and the kids are able to, with a parent or by themselves, if they can, write or read, depending on their age, they can fill it in. They can say who their best friend is. Maybe it's their sibling, or maybe it's another friend, and the things that they both like, the things they have in common, the things that they don't have in common, what makes them laugh, and how they don't look the same. And they'd say, I love my fill in the blank, and I love my friends fill in the blank, or whatever it is. Our differences make us special and make our friendship more fun, and and I love my friend. So giving kids an opportunity to celebrate differences, get comfortable with difference, I think children don't, nobody likes to feel like they don't know things, right? um, I think, especially if we haven't been in an environment, we weren't raised in an environment where inclusivity and curiosity was something that was promoted or celebrated. Um, we, some people clam up about that, but giving kids an opportunity to, yeah, celebrate those differences is very helpful. Okay, number 6, teach them how to think and not what to think. So kids need a clear, full education to be able to think critically about these issues, anti-racism. I made the terrible mistake of going on, what is it called? That it's like DC Urban Mom and Dads. I don't know why I did that. But I went on and I think I don't know. Anyway, um, and I was on a thread about summer school. My oldest is a kindergartner. We have no idea what's going on. But because of COVID, it's, we're not in school. We don't know what's going on. And so I was trying to get information or thoughts or, anything. Um, and on this feed about summer school, it ended up being this huge, long rant from a bunch of people about like, racism, and opposition to CRT being taught in schools. And anyway, it was very interesting. But I think I was looking at that and I was just thinking, wow, you know, media literacy is really important. um, I was looking at a lot of the comments and just thinking, wow, like a lot of these people who are talking about critical race theory, I don't think they know what it is. And I'm not quite sure where they're getting their information. But the good news is that media literacy could start very young. Even just sharing the name of the author and the illustrator and reading their bio on the jacket. My kids love learning more about the authors and illustrators. Sometimes we get like book bundles of the same author. Like my kids love Grace Lean. I don't know if anybody else's kids love reading Ling and Ting. My kids think it's the funniest thing on the planet, and it's very funny. But sometimes we even look up more information about the author and illustrator on their website. And so making a habit of learning media literacy and who is sharing information is something simple that you can start really young with your kids that will serve them very well with their anti-racist education. Is very important. There's also, there's also a lot of lessons in children's books about consent and power dynamics. And that opportunity to talk about that is in a lot of places in children's literature. And it's a big part of understanding the world that we live in. Number 7 is to make the unexpected expected. So in issue 2, we talk a lot about partial stories and the danger of partial stories, right? In our education system, in our society, there's a very long and healthy tradition of omission to partial stories to full lies surrounding the histories of Black and Brown people and a lot of groups of people. So we have a lot of work to do as parents to kind of show them examples that show that, stereotypes and partial stories are not true. Before they even get to them, right? So we flip the script and we turn things on its head. Every child, especially children of color, they need these stories first, and they need them on an ongoing basis. Now, that's a huge challenge for us as parents because we didn't learn them. We didn't learn them at all. And they're not out there. It's very hard to find them. They're not common. But it's crucial for these kids and their self-love and their self-esteem that these be their foundational stories, not just stories of pain. And for white children, it's really important because it challenges false ideas that any group of people, is superior to another. So I'm just showing you a small example from issue 2, Ditto Kids, where we're talking a lot about partial stories and their danger and why people have done that. Like I mentioned earlier, I was so excited to do the history and some current stuff about Mali and the Kingdom of Mali, and to reframe a specific African nation and empire back in the day, civilization. For one thing, because when do kids ever learn about a specific country in Africa? Almost never. But also to reframe, to introduce this country to them as this is a place where there was an enormous amount of learning and academia going on. The artist who did this on the right, by the way, she's local, she's in Silver Spring, she's awesome. But we talk about, here you can see like what is on a Timbuktu manuscript. We've got explanations. People were studying about solar and lunar eclipses, bunch of things, methods to determine the Qibla or the direction of Mecca for prayer using spherical trigonometry. I had so much fun learning, and I watched a lot of documentaries, and we had a great guest editor who is from Mali and writes children's books, help me with this. So totally loads of work to get in there first and to find ways to share these unshared stories with kids. But it is work that is well worth the effort when it comes to preparing kids for their journey in anti-racism. Number 8 is to listen to people and teach humility to your kids and for ourselves. We live in a climate where people are portrayed as being 100% right or 100% wrong. And that is not a thing, right? Nobody is perfect, and no movement, no person, no political party is. And I am a firm believer that we as adults shouldn't be sacrificing, our moral compass to any movement or organization and just saying, you are 100% right and I'm not even going to think about it, or you are 100% wrong and I'm not even going to think about it. We should focus on teaching young children. And then, just backing up, I do not believe that we should be teaching young children to follow like a certain political party either. Our focus as parents should be teaching our children values and how to think about things, so that when the time comes for them to make, these decisions, these good justice promoting, value-based decisions, they'll make the right one because they know how to think about it. When we teach kids to think critically and to listen to one another, like truly listen, they're much more prepared to navigate the complexities of anti-bias issues and other issues as well, and to contribute in real and meaningful ways. I feel like I had a lot of very interesting experiences because of the way I was raised in my education and just background. Like I mentioned, I was raised in Baltimore. But I am also a member of the LDS Church, which is a very conservative church. So I was raised in like a liberal place in a conservative church in a Black family from West Baltimore. And I went to a lot of different schools and ended up doing a fair bit of traveling. And I'm so glad I did all those things. I'm so glad I had those experiences, and I'm very, very grateful for them because it's given me an opportunity to learn to listen to people and to learn to think critically about information and issues and sort through things myself. And I hope make good choices. And I think we really need to teach our kids to be humble and, try to demonstrate that in ourselves. Nobody has all the answers. So we really need to listen to each other, because when we listen to each other, we have more answers, right? Together, everyone is really an expert of their own experiences. And so here's an activity. We talked a lot in issue 2 about the importance of different perspectives. And so there were some little activities for the kids to do, and just, talking about how there's so many people in the world, and we all look at different issues. Like if you look at things from a different lens, it can seem completely different to one person based on another, or instead of another based on their experiences. Um, and I think that's really important. Kids are naturally and necessarily um, a little more egocentric, so that they can develop when they're young. And that is a very important thing for their development. So I think giving them the opportunity to see things from different perspectives is really important for preparing them and, guiding them on their anti-racist education. Okay, number 9. So we need to treat our kids the way we want them to treat others. No shame for any parents, because parenting is hard, or, and no shame for your kids, right? There's a big movement in parenting right now, about like decolonizing your parenting. And it's hard. It's very, very hard, because, when you've been taught a certain way, but, as their parent or caregiver, the way that we treat our child teaches them how to treat themselves and how to treat other people. And that matters so much when it comes to anti-racism, because we want to be filling our kids up with a lot of love and showing them what it means to listen to people and love people and respect other people. And if we don't do that for them, they're going to have a hard time doing that for other people. So yeah, decolonizing how we care for our kids matters. It is a long process, full disclosure. I have so much work to do. But also being humble about our mistakes. This is something that I'm really big on, and we talk about it a lot in our curriculum, that, mistakes are a beautiful thing, and changing ourselves, apologizing, learning, and growing it's pretty amazing thing that, we as humans are able to do. And it shouldn't be something that it is, right? It's something that most of us are not big fans of. But we can learn and grow and change, and learn to embrace, the painful growth process that comes with that. Okay, number 10, encourage questions and curiosity. So we really, for our children in our home, want to create, or classroom, want to create an atmosphere where curiosity and wonder and inclusivity is the norm. Kids have so many questions about things they don't have any context for. Adults, especially in anti-racism, or it's a lot of things, we have questions about things that we don't have any context for. And that's going to be something that continues throughout, our children's lives. But curiosity it really is a driving factor for learning, and self-acceptance and acceptance of other people. A lot of people, it's like you go to the grocery store or whatever, and, your kid loudly asks a question about somebody else there. And everybody wants to shush their kid and say like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed, or whatever it is. But we can't shame them or make them feel embarrassed or make them feel weird when they don't know something about other people. My 3-year-old, bless her heart, Zora, she is like the queen of asking the loudest questions about people. I think she wants them to hear, to be honest. I think she wants them to hear, and good. it's, I want her to not feel embarrassed about the things she doesn't know. When we do that, or when we kind of like, even if we don't shush them, but we just kind of like don't answer, or just kind of low key shut down certain questions about other people, they internalize that. If it's shame, they internalize that shame, or if it's like, oh, we don't talk about this, they internalize that too. Um, and when it's shame, they associate that shame with the thing that they were questioning, that they were having a question about, like another culture, or somebody who's not the same race as them, or somebody who is using some sort of assistance tool, you know. And then they push those feelings away. And it encourages kids to push away and, you know, feel uncomfortable with people who are not exactly like them. A lot of prejudice is actually just like ignorance. And I know that's kind of like a very 90s line. Uh, because there's plenty of people who are very informed and they're also prejudiced, right? But there's also a lot of people who are fairly ignorant about these issues. Um, and so, you know, when we have trouble being humble, or, you know, we feel this like inability to kind of like be humble, um, we we don't want to like expose that ignorance, that we don't know things, right? And so that's when people start to rely on stereotypes, and they start to resort to assumptions and biases. They're just like, oh, you know, like low key, I don't know this, so whatever, yeah, sure, this is X, Y, and Z, and that's just what I'm just going to go with what everybody else is saying. So, you know, creating, in whether it's in a classroom or in your home, an environment of curiosity and inclusivity, I think, is really important. Here's another example from Ditto Kids, just an activity to get kids thinking, and thinking about different perspectives, and asking questions. You know, we talk about how there's so many people in the world and every one of us is so unique. And so there's this little activity where they have like a spinner, and they can ask the same question to multiple people and then take note of the answer. But yes. Oh, whoops. Okay. And the final one, 11, is just basic one. Just encourage them to love themselves. Every kid, every person, us included, because if we love ourselves, our kids are going to see what that looks like. They need this from square one of their anti-racism education through the end of their education, which it never does end, right? We will all be doing this forever. Yay. And so all of us, we need to know what it is to feel love and to love ourselves. And this should be the core of all of our work. This should be the beginning point. This should be the ending point, this connection between loving ourselves and loving other people. And, you know, giving our children a sense of what it means to show that and display that in their community, and in, you know, the other kids that they come into contact with in their lives. Okay. And so that's the end of that. I wanted to open it up for questions. No guarantees that I'll be able to answer, but if anybody has any, feel free to throw it in the chat. And if not, no pressure to ask questions, because it's not required. I'll just leave it open for a few minutes and sit here awkwardly, I guess. I did not plan for that. And I really could sit here awkwardly for a few minutes. Gotten really good at that with young kids, just like hanging out.
Also, if you'd rather unmute yourself to just ask out loud, that's welcome too. But I do see there is a question in the chat right now, Alexandria, about the Ages, the magazine.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Feel free to just chime in. Yes, the magazine is designed for ages 3.5 through 12. It gets progressively more challenging as you go through. And so, if you're starting with a young child, or even if you're not starting with a young child, people don't get through it. It's not designed to be gotten through in one sitting. It's something that's going to be on your shelf that you do a couple of pages of, and then you come back to it in a week as things sink in a little bit, and then you do another page and you put it back on the shelf, and then you come back to those past 2 pages. So and I think you can start it with like an early 3. It just it depends on your child's like developmental arc, I think. You're welcome. Did anyone have any specific questions about about experiences with their own children, or I don't know. Yeah.
I do have a question.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm trying to formulate it right now, but
That's
I'll
okay.
have it ready in like about half a minute. I'm just piecing. It was a great presentation, so thank you. But I do have a question. It's on the tip of my tongue, but
Oh yes, take your time. Formulate away.
okay. I'm going to turn my camera on as well.
Okay.
My name is Andre Javier Berry, and my wife and I, 2 of our children were bugs at the cooperative school, so hold it very near and dear to our hearts. Um, so my question is, I really liked your point about making sure your children will see who you spend time with, who you're working with, who you invite into your home. What suggestions would you have to, because I think for us, it kind of, we came to a realization that, oh boy, we only invite a certain type of people into our home. And it was a very deliberate choice to start inviting people from different cultures, different races into our home. And it was we weren't intentionally excluding folks, but it was kind of this self-awareness that we came to at some point. But what are some practical suggestions that you have to sort of break away from that pattern of inviting people not like you into your home, whether it's race and ethnicity, faith, or even your sexuality? Like, what are some simple kind of principles or practical things that we can do to reinforce that?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think that this is something that it's just really easy to do. Like egg on my face. My kid, I think a year ago, she said, "Mom, why don't we ever have any friends who are Latino come over?" And I was like, "Well, you're right. We surely don't. And I don't know why, but you know what? That's weird that we don't." So I think there's a few things that come to mind. I love chatting personally, big chatter. I love being out in the community. My background's in nonprofit. I worked at Manna for a long time running the children's Smart Sacks program. I love going to the community centers and just making friends. Well, pre-COVID. The library, talking to people, kids play with everybody and anyone, it takes just a minute to exchange a phone number and to text. I find that when you're open and you're chatty, most people are not bored, but looking for conversation while they're watching their kids run around the gym or whatever it is. Another suggestion I would have is volunteering. Getting out into the community. I think you will have the opportunity to meet a lot of other people who you are volunteering with. like I mentioned, I worked in nonprofit for a long time, so it's near and dear to my heart. But there's the great thing about volunteering and nonprofits, especially community-centric nonprofits, not like DC kind of international development ones so much. But like when I worked at Mana or I worked at United Way for a while, we had our office was attached to the warehouse, and we just had everybody, and it was wonderful. And I love just meeting the new people, learning about their kids. Go and volunteer, and there's going to be other families who are volunteering too, or other people who they work there maybe, but you get to know them because you go there a lot. In terms of faith and faith community, so like I mentioned, I'm LDS, Mormon, and that is a very white conservative group. So for a long time, our family, we speak, so here's something. Learning languages, if you speak another language, that's great. Or if you don't, I'm a big fan of non-native speakers teaching their kids other languages. We've been speaking to our children non-natively in French since birth. And I spoke with them in Mandarin for 4 years, until my brain was going to explode from 3 languages. But it gives a lot of opportunities to meet people that to have relationships with people that you might not have had otherwise. But yes, in terms of, faith, though I do have a pretty, narrow faith community, like Sunday type thing. I'm a big fan of interfaith events, just community events. There's so many people out there who are doing all this incredible work. I've seen that there are groups on, what is that thing? Meetup. For example, if you're like a multiracial family, my family's a multiracial family. There's like multiracial families of MoCo, where you just go and meet people who are in multiracial families. So I would say Google. I hope that answers your question or gives some practical ideas.
It does. Thank you. And I just kind of for context as well, I think, so our, there's our youngest, for us, the neighborhood we live in DC, it's changing a bit, but it's predominantly African-American. And we were kind of recognizing that we were spending more time with the non-African-American white families in the neighborhood. So it was kind of like, oh boy, we just need to invite all our neighbors and find opportunities to, so it was just kind of it was in a way kind of a painful experience or painful realization, but at the same time, kind of liberating that all right, so there's some steps we can take. We can be more deliberate. We could be better. Of course, we can always, like you said, it's a lifelong thing, but I think that's sometimes even in our neighborhoods, right? Like that's kind of how well do we know our neighbors and how well do we engage with them?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of I grew up in apartments in Baltimore, and I loved it. I feel like that's one of the great things about living in kind of communities that are planned a little bit closer, where people are closer together. You see each other constantly, and yeah, like you have this great opportunity to throw like a cookout or something. Or like start like borrow some DVDs from each other. I don't know, something like random like that. That's the kind of stuff that I like to do with neighbors and people. I just like to insert myself in places where there are people want me there. But thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for the whole, for everything.
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, I don't want to keep people. So the master of ceremonies here, Amy, I'll let you do your thing. Yeah, she go.
Thank you, Alexandria. I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I feel like I was like typing as fast as I could to capture your nuggets of wisdom. I appreciate everything that you shared with us and the time that it took. we all understand as parents of little children, it's hard to find that time. So you were very generous to spend your evening with us.
Happy to. Thanks for having me.
And thanks all for joining us. We'll see you later.